For this next topic, we want to talk about making decisions and writing conclusions, in particular the writing conclusions bit, but it connects to making decisions. Because in hypothesis testing, there are multiple steps. And step 5, you will be making a decision. And your only two decisions ever that you get to make are either to reject H0 or not reject H0. That is it. Those are the only two choices ever that we will ever make. Rejecting H0 or not rejecting H0. Now, we don't really know why at this stage that happens, but that will happen in step 5. And then in step 6, we're going to write a conclusion. So let me show you the hypothesis testing piece from your course pack. This is actually from the exam notes packet. So if you look down here in step 5, right, it's got something here that you don't know what that means yet, but it says reject H0. Right? So it's talking about rejecting or not rejecting H0. That's step 5. And then step 6, it says to state the conclusion. And that was the one for 10.2, but here's section 10.3, state the conclusion. And as a matter of fact, in chapter 11, state the conclusion, state the conclusion. There it is, right? So obviously, knowing how to write a conclusion is important because it's just assumed everywhere that you're going to know how to do it. And this is the page where we learn how to do that. So when you're writing a conclusion, you have options, but only two options, and they're tied to the decision you make in step 5. So if in step 5 you decide to reject H0, the only thing you are allowed to write is over here. This is a script. And you will write, there is sufficient evidence to support the claim that. That is a script that does not change. And then you will write what your alternative hypothesis was in words and with context. Now, if you do not reject H0, then you will write there is not sufficient evidence to support the claim that. They're the exact same phrase, right? It's just that do not reject goes with there is not sufficient evidence. And then you write what your H1 is in words. So H1 is your alternative hypothesis. So you write your H1 with context. Right? That context is important. Now notice, these are the only decisions and these are the only conclusions we write. There's no accepting. There's no proving. We didn't prove anything. We just showed that there was sufficient evidence to support the claim. But that doesn't mean that it's definitely the case. And that's an important distinction. Similarly, when we do not reject H0, it doesn't mean that H0 is true. I don't know that. I don't accept that. Right? I never prove that. All I'm showing is that I have evidence to support the null, or I do not have evidence. That's it. Right? We never write the words, I accept H1, or I proved this. No, you didn't. Right? That's not what this is. This isn't proving things. It's just having evidence to support particular claims. All right, so let's see an example down here. So boxes of a certain kind of cereal are labeled as containing 16 ounces. An inspector thinks that the mean weight may be less than this so that the company can scam its customers. He collects a random sample of cereal boxes and weighs them to test his idea. Okay, so we start off with the null and alternative hypothesis, and it asks for them in both symbols and words. All right, so we've done this before a little bit, but let's do it again. So for the symbols, which again is what we spend most of our time doing, but it doesn't hurt to kind of remind yourself that these are connected ideas. So the symbols, H0, H1, put a colon after each one of them. And we're talking about the mean weight. You can see it right here, mean, which is of course mu. That's the symbol for population mean. Now we always assume that it's a value unless we can prove it otherwise. And the value assumed here is right here. We assumed it's 16 ounces unless we can prove otherwise. Now, then you have to look for the direction word. There will be a word in here that'll tell us which way we need to go. And the inspector thinks that the mean weight may be less, right? So that less means that it is a left-tailed test. All right, now let's tie these to some words over here. Okay, so this would be that the average weight is 16 ounces, so the average weight of the cereal or something like that. So the average weight of the cereal is 16 ounces, which is 1 pound, by the way. And then this would be that the average, right, because that's what this was, the average weight of the cereal is less than 16 ounces. Done. All right. Now, if the inspector decides to not reject the null hypothesis, how would a statistician write the conclusion? Okay, so we're going to not reject. So you can see that's a step 5. They're saying, hey, we're not going to reject HO. Right? That's our decision. So our decision right here, right, step 5 would be do not reject HO. And again, you don't know why yet those decisions are made, but they are. Okay, so how do we write the conclusion? Well, you start off with the script up here. Maybe I should have been explicit. This is a script, right? These two pieces right here. Okay, so we will say there is not sufficient evidence The only word I ever allow to be changed is the word sufficient. Some students like to write enough, which is fine. You want to say there is not enough evidence. That's fine. Not sufficient evidence to support the claim that, right? That part never changes. The only thing that ever changes in it is this word right here. Whoop, the word not. That's it. Sometimes not is there and sometimes it's not. So in this case it is, right? Because this was a not reject. And then you write what the claim was. So the claim is your H1. We actually already wrote it. That the average weight of the cereal, I'm being a little more fancy with it, putting in some articles here, the cereal, is less than 16 ounces. Okay, so one other thing to notice before we leave this page behind, which is that there's a logical structure here that's restricting how we get to talk about these things. We can't just go off willy-nilly and write whatever we want. We have to follow this, and it's got a little bit of a weird quirk to it, because in step 5, we make a decision about H naught, right? We decide to either reject H naught or do not reject H naught, or H0, whichever way you want to say it. Reject H0, right? Reject the null or do not reject the null. So you're making decisions in step 5. Decisions, if I could spell decisions right, about the null hypothesis. But in step 6, we don't write about that. We write about H1. So even though step 5 is all about H0, step 6, we write the conclusion with H1 in context. So H1, the alternative. So we write conclusions are about the alternative. hypothesis. And that's a little strange, but that's how the logic structure of these problems work. So when you make a decision here, it's going to affect what you're going to write down here for your script, but the H1 piece never changes. This step is always going to be about H0, the null hypothesis. And this step 6 will always be about H1. And you'll have to always write that conclusion about the alternative hypotheses with your context. Right? So never forget to put context in.